If I told you that a single pamphlet, barely 47 pages long, once shook an entire empire, would you believe it? If I told you that one man's words were so explosive, so dangerous, that they ignited a revolution and threatened a king, would you dare to keep listening? This is not just a book. This is the spark that burned down the old world and built a new one. Thomas Paine didn't just write common sense. He wrote the most electrifying call for freedom in human history. And today. You're about to hear the very words that terrified tyrants. Stay with me, because once these words enter your mind, there's no going back. Hello, everyone. Hi, all. Welcome to BookPodCastZone. If I told you that a single pamphlet, barely 47 pages long, once shook an entire empire, would you believe it? If I told you that one man's words were so explosive, so dangerous, that they ignited a revolution and threatened a king, would you dare to keep listening? This is not just a book. This is the spark that burned down the old world and built a new one. Thomas Paine didn't just write common sense. He wrote the most electrifying call for freedom in human history. And today. You're about to hear the very words that terrified tyrants. Stay with me, because once these words enter your mind, there's no going back. Hello, everyone. Hi, all. Welcome to BookPodCastZone. I'm John, and honestly, this is one of the most exciting deep dives we have ever put together. Our subject today, Thomas Paine's Common Sense, is physically tiny. The first edition was something like 47 pages, though it got bigger later, maybe up to 120. But the shockwave it created, it was just seismic. It didn't just ask for a little change. It demanded a total clean break.
And I'm really excited to get into this one, because you're so right. When we think about the American Revolution, our minds usually jump straight to the Declaration of Independence. We see that as the starting gun.
Right.
But Paine's work, which came out a full 6 months earlier, was really the ideological fuel that made the Declaration even possible. It's like finding the exact moment a debate shifts from, hey, can we fix this system, to we need to burn the system down and start over.
That is a perfect way to put it. And our mission for this deep dive is really custom built for you, the listener. We are focusing hard on that intellectual detonation you just mentioned. We're using this incredible analysis of the text that doesn't just, give you a summary. It actually breaks down Paine's arguments piece by piece. It treats each section like a distinct phase of the revolution itself. It's a fantastic shortcut to understanding how a few pieces of paper could literally change the world.
And we have to start with the context, because it is just staggering. Picture it. January 10th, 1776. The colonies are still, for the most part, arguing about taxes and representation within the empire.
Right. They're still trying to patch things up.
Exactly. And into that environment, Paine drops this bomb. A book with, depending on the edition, up to 120 pages of what was considered completely treasonous, inflammatory ideas. And he sells it for 50 cents.
And that price, that 50 cents, is so important, isn't it?
Oh, it's crucial. This wasn't some expensive volume for the landed gentry. It was priced for the common person, the artisan, the farmer, the sailor. That alone was a revolutionary act. He wasn't just talking to the elites. He was arming everyone with the argument.
The affordability is one thing, but the part that always gets me, the detail that proves the air was just electric with this revolutionary feeling, is the sales number. 100,000 copies. In just 3 months.
It's an unbelievable figure.
I mean, that would be a bestseller today with modern printing and distribution. How does a pamphlet advocating treason printed on hand-cranked presses even do that?
Well, that speed, that viral spread, it tells us a few things. First, the revolutionary ideas weren't just simmering under the surface. They were at a rolling boil. People were just waiting for someone to give them permission, to give them the language to express what they already felt.
So Paine didn't create the fire, he just struck the match.
Precisely. And second, it shows us that the organizational structures were already in place. The printers in Philadelphia, like Robert Bell, who took the initial risk, the committees of correspondence, the secret networks, they were already active and coordinated enough to move this text up and down the coast, almost like an underground railroad for ideas.
So this wasn't just Paine writing a powerful essay. He was tapping into a pre-existing, highly motivated network.
Yes. He provided the framework, the language that turned all these separate local frustrations, attacks here, a soldier quartered there, into one unified national demand for something totally new.
He basically handed every single person their own personal, ready-to-go argument for independence, something they could read, memorize, and then shout in a tavern.
Or hide under their floorboards. It was dangerous stuff.
Okay, let's dig into that first chapter. Our source analysis calls it the spark in the dark, which feels very appropriate. We have to start with the scene itself, the immediacy of it all.
The scene is everything. January 10th, 1776. Philadelphia. It's the dead of winter, cold, dark. But inside the print shops, there's this heat, this energy. You can just imagine one of those pamphlets coming off the press, the ink is still wet, and the person who picks it up just knows this little bundle of paper feels way too small for what's inside it.
The ideas were bigger than the object.
Immense.
Right.
And what Paine does right from the first page is he just completely bypasses all the polite, legalistic debate that's been going on for a decade.
Yeah, he doesn't care about the finer points of the Stamp Act or whatever.
Not at all. He just asks this incredibly simple, visceral question. It boils down to, why are we, grown adults, still bowing down to a king 3,000 miles away who treats us like disobedient children?
He just cuts right to the heart of the matter. It's a question of dignity, not just law.
Exactly. For years, you had brilliant men like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson arguing these incredibly complex points of English common law, of parliamentary supremacy versus colonial charters. Paine just waves all of that away.
He's not interested in the intellectual gymnastics.
No. He strips away all the tradition, the loyalty, the religious justification that propped up the monarchy, and he appeals directly to the common sense of the farmer, the shopkeeper. Yeah. He just says, look around. Does this relationship make any rational sense?
And that directness is why it resonated so immediately. This is what our source calls the emotional crucible. It wasn't just an idea. It was a feeling he tapped into, that collective frustration. You could almost feel the clenched fists of farmers losing their land over taxes, the quiet fury of mothers burying sons lost in wars fought for the empire.
The helplessness of dock workers in Boston watching their livelihoods get shut down by a distant parliament. It wasn't abstract political theory for them. It was a validation of their daily, grinding anger.
That's the real distinction, isn't it? When Paine was writing, he wasn't trying to score points in a debate with other intellectuals.
No.
He was speaking directly to the person whose life was being actively harmed by these policies. The oppression was personal, so the rage was personal.
And that made the argument undeniable.
Let's try to add some texture to that with a U.S. live example from the time. Think about a dock worker in Boston in, say, 1775. Your entire world, your ability to put food on the table, it all depends on that port being open.
It's your lifeline.
It's everything.
Yeah.
So the Crown starts imposing new duties, new restrictions, making your job harder. And then after the Tea Party, as punishment, they pass the Boston Port Act and just shut the whole thing down.
It's economic warfare.
It's total economic destruction. That's not a fine. It's not a penalty. It's a deliberate act to starve a city into submission.
And it affects everyone. The merchants, the sailors, the rope makers, the barrel makers, the tavern owners who serve the sailors. The entire economy just grinds to a halt. Paine's message to that dock worker was simple. That feeling you have that this distant power is actively trying to ruin you, that's not you being paranoid. That's common sense.
And it wasn't just in Boston. Think about a merchant in Philadelphia or New York. They weren't just dealing with taxes. They had to deal with the admiralty courts.
That's a fantastic point.
For anyone listening who doesn't know the specifics, these were special British courts. They handled maritime cases like smuggling or tax evasion. But the key thing was there was no jury of your peers.
No. You were judged by an official appointed by the Crown. Someone whose salary, whose loyalty was tied to London, not to your community.
So your fate was decided by your accuser, essentially.
It felt that way.
Yeah.
And taking away the right to a trial by a local jury, that was seen as a fundamental violation of the rights of Englishmen. It was a huge, huge source of friction. It meant the Crown could enforce its most unpopular laws without any pushback from the local community. It was a symbol of total legal powerlessness. Paine took all of that simmering resentment and said, this is not a system that can be fixed. It's a system that must be escaped.
Which brings us back to the logistics, that number. 100,000 copies in 3 months. That's not just a sales record. You have to remember, people were risking their lives. To print this, to sell this, even to be caught reading it, that was treason.
Absolutely. The people involved were not just curious consumers. They were ideologically starving. They were desperate for this message.
And the sheer difficulty of it. I mean, moving a 120-page document across 13 colonies, mostly on horseback or by small coastal ships, in the middle of winter, with British patrols everywhere.
It required a network of printers who were, frankly, committing treason. It required distributors, couriers who were willing to brave checkpoints and inspections. It was a decentralized, organic, and incredibly motivated movement.
And it showed that the desire for this message was stronger than any of the old local rivalries between, say, Massachusetts and Virginia.
It really did. It united them.
But the network could only move it so fast. The other key was the style of the writing itself, right? He wrote so plainly.
Oh, absolutely. That was his secret weapon. There was no Latin, no dense legal arguments, no quoting obscure Greek philosophers. He wrote with this raw, emotional punch.
He wrote for the person who was going to have it read to them out loud in a pub.
That's exactly who he was writing for. And because of that, it became the first real American shared experience. It created a common vocabulary for revolution. For every one person who bought a copy, you can bet 10 or 20 others heard it read aloud.
It just completely democratized the argument. Suddenly, the farmer and the dock worker had the same intellectual ammunition as John Adams.
It leveled the playing field of ideas overnight.
It really makes you think about today. Our sources pose this challenge. If one man's voice in one pamphlet could wake up 2.5 million people in 1776, what's the equivalent today? What single idea could possibly wake up hundreds of millions of people who are just drowning in noise and complexity?
It's a tough parallel to draw. We are so saturated with information, but so little of it has that kind of clarifying power. The force we need today wouldn't be a physical object, probably, but a piece of truth delivered with such undeniable clarity that it just cuts through everything.
It would have to be an argument so simple, so self-evident, that once you hear it, you can't unhear it. That was the real power of its viral launch.
A powerful thought. We've seen the spark. Now we get to see the fire it started.
That's right. And if you're enjoying this breakdown of how Paine's words literally built a country, we'd really love for you to join our community. Your support is what allows us to keep doing these deep dives.
We're really just getting to the most radical part of the whole pamphlet.
Like, subscribe, and share for more update, and continue to next.
Welcome back to BookPodCastZone. We've covered how common sense went viral. Now we're digging into the philosophical inferno of Chapter 2. This is where Paine stops asking for changes and starts, well, throwing bombs at the very foundation of European society, monarchy itself.
This is such a critical turn. Before Paine, almost all the colonial protests, even after years of boycotts and riots, were focused on the actions of the crown-bad policies, corrupt ministers, unfair taxes. They very rarely questioned the legitimacy of the king himself or the institution. They basically wanted King George to be a better father. They weren't asking for a divorce.
You are so right. The message was always, "Dear King George, your government is making terrible mistakes. Please fix them." Paine comes along and says, "Forget the policies for a minute. Let's talk about the throne you're sitting on."
Exactly. Our source analysis has this great image for it. Picture a crown made of lies, passed down like a bad family heirloom. He wasn't asking for better management from the CEO. He was calling for the dissolution of the entire corporation, which was an incredibly radical thing to do. I mean, he took this concept of kingship, which was wrapped in centuries of tradition and religious awe.
The divine right of kings.
The divine right of kings. And he just drags it out into the public square and basically laughs at it. For centuries, challenging the king wasn't just treason, it was heresy. It was challenging God.
And yet Paine just waves away 2,000 years of that inherited authority with this simple, biting logic. He boils royalty down to a basic absurdity. He essentially asks, why should one family have permanent, absolute power over millions just because their ancestor was a successful warlord centuries ago?
It's the accident of birth argument.
That's the heart of it. That's his core argument against hereditary rule. It is, in his words, an insult to common sense. Kings are chosen by an accident of biology, not by merit, not by competence, and certainly not by God. He points out the obvious historical truth that a wise king can be followed by a cruel one, or a competent queen by an idiot, and the people just have to suffer through it. They have no say.
I do wonder, though, was there a risk in making the argument so simple? You know, the educated elites, the Jeffersons and Adamses, they respected complex philosophical arguments based on Locke or Montesquieu. Didn't Paine's approach risk sounding, I don't know, crude to them?
That's a really sharp question. And I think Paine understood that risk. But he saw simplicity as a weapon. He deliberately cut through all that complexity because he knew the educated class was, for the most part, still loyal or at least deeply hesitant. They were trapped in their own intellectual frameworks.
So he wasn't really writing for them.
Not primarily. He was aiming for a mass uprising, a popular movement. The average person who hadn't read Locke could instantly understand the logic. If the next guy in line for the throne is a known fool, why on earth am I obligated to obey him for my entire life just because of who his father was?
It's an undeniable common sense point. And for the average colonist reading this, who'd been taught their whole life to revere the king, the emotional gut punch must have been immense. It's that realization that our source points to. Their ruler is just a guy with better PR. It strips away all the magic.
It completely demystifies the monarchy. It takes this sacred, ancient principle and makes it seem mundane, illogical, and frankly, offensive to any thinking person.
And once that happens, the entire structure of authority begins to crumble.
That's the critical political shift.
Yeah.
Paine forces his readers to stop thinking about the divine right of kings and start thinking about their own natural rights. He makes them realize that true sovereignty, true power, resides in them, the people, not in some palace in London.
The British authorities must have seen this as the most dangerous part of the pamphlet. This wasn't about a tax on tea anymore. This was an assault on the crown itself.
Absolutely. And you see it visually in that context bite. From our source, King George III's face was on every single coin, every piece of currency they touched. Every time you bought a loaf of bread or paid a debt, you were holding a little piece of royal authority in your hand. It was a constant subconscious reinforcement of his power.
And Paine, as our source says, just flipped it over and showed the rest.
He did, by arguing that the man whose face was on that coin was a fraud, and the system that put him there was absurd. He desanctified that symbol for millions of people. It created a cognitive shift. Suddenly, you realize the value of the coin is in the metal and the labor it represents, not the face stamped on it.
If we try to connect that to a modern U.S. live example, we're really talking about accidental leadership versus earned leadership.
Right.
We debate the fitness and character of our leaders constantly.
All the time. Paine's argument, though it was aimed at a king, translates perfectly to questioning the fitness of any leader who gets power through, say, institutional advantage or family name rather than proven merit and a public mandate.
You see echoes of it today in discussions about political dynasties, right? When people feel like they're being asked to vote for someone whose main credential is their last name.
Or when they see powerful positions in government filled by unelected officials who have immense power but very little public accountability. It's the same fundamental idea Paine was pushing. Power must be justified by performance, not by pedigree or position. Leadership have to be earned and constantly re-earned.
Once the colonists truly absorbed that idea that a bad king is just a bad leader and they had a right to choose a better one, the psychological barrier to revolution just completely dissolved.
It really did.
It's the ultimate mic drop on tyranny, a lasting reminder that any tradition, if it only exists to protect unjust power, deserves to be questioned and replaced.
And it leaves you with that powerful cliffhanger question that leads right into the next chapter and eventually the Declaration of Independence.
If blood doesn't make a leader, what does?
And that question really redefined what it meant to be a citizen in the modern world. That system, the one that demands merit over birthright, is something we are still fighting to perfect today.
We've deconstructed the institution. Now we have to list the crimes that made the break necessary.
Yes, let's get into the evidence.
Like, subscribe, and share for more update, and continue to next. Welcome back to BookPodCastZone. So we've seen the viral launch, and we've seen Paine's philosophical takedown of monarchy. Now we get to Chapter 3, which is the practical, actionable part. Our analysis calls it America's Divorce Papers. This is where Paine stops with the theory and gets down to brass tacks. He moves from the absurdity of the king as an idea to the concrete list of his crimes against the colonies.
This section is so important because it's the bridge from abstract philosophy to the immediate reality of declaring independence. Months before Jefferson even sat down to write the Declaration, Paine provided the intellectual framework for it. He lays out the case. It's no longer a question of if we should separate. It's a meticulously documented argument for why we must.
You can just imagine this being read aloud in a tavern in Virginia or a town hall in Massachusetts. It's like a 3,000-mile-long breakup letter. Paine wasn't just complaining. He was giving every person in that room the exact script they needed to justify this enormous, terrifying step to their neighbors, and maybe more importantly to themselves.
The psychological shift that happens here is profound. You have to remember, before common sense, even the most radical protesters still had this nagging feeling of disloyalty. They were, in their own minds, subjects of the king, and opposing him felt wrong, almost like a sin.
It went against everything they'd been taught.
Exactly. Paine completely reframes the narrative. By laying out the crown's crimes one by one, he makes them realize they are not being disloyal. They have been betrayed.
The fault isn't with them, it's with the crown.
The crown, through its own actions, has voided the contract. It has become effectively an enemy state.
So let's get into that evidence. Paine essentially puts Britain on trial, and he presents these grievances as exhibits. And they aren't abstract, they are things people experienced every single day.
The first and the most famous one is taxes without a seat at the table. We all know the slogan, no taxation without representation. But our source says Paine made it a scar. He showed that this wasn't just about money. It wasn't just an unfair fee. It was a fundamental denial of their political existence. By taking their property without their consent, the crown was treating them like a resource to be exploited, not as citizens to be governed.
And the specifics here are so important. It wasn't just that the taxes were high, it's what the money was used for. Often, it was to pay for the salaries of British officials and the upkeep of the British Standing Army stationed in America.
So they were literally paying to fund their own occupation.
Exactly. The money taken from them was used to build the very apparatus that was oppressing them. Think about the Stamp Act. It was so insidious because it taxed everything made of paper legal documents, newspapers, contracts, even playing cards.
It was a brilliant piece of political tyranny because it hit every single level of society. It wasn't just a tax on rich merchants. It affected the lawyer, the printer, the tavern owner. Everyone felt it. Paine used that to show that the crown felt entitled to intrude into every corner of their lives.
Okay, grievance number 2. Soldiers quartered in your spare room. This one is so visceral. It's the physical imposition of the empire right inside your private home.
This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a deep violation of the sanctity of the home, which was a sacred right under English common law. The idea that your home is your castle. Imagine it. A British soldier, loyal only to the king, is now living under your roof. He's eating your food, using your firewood, disrupting your family. You have no say in the matter. It's the ultimate symbol of arbitrary power.
It turns every home into a potential barracks, a point of friction with an occupying force.
It makes the political personal in the most immediate way possible.
And the third major indictment, and maybe the most devastating economically, ports locked like slammed doors. This was the crown proving it was willing to use the colonists' own infrastructure as a weapon against them.
And the Boston Port Act is the perfect U.S. live example of this. It's economic warfare, pure and simple. After the Tea Party, Parliament's response wasn't a fine, it wasn't arrests. It was to shut down the Port of Boston completely.
To strangle the city.
To paralyze it. If you cut off the main artery of commerce for an entire region, you were intentionally trying to starve its people into compliance. Paine made sure everyone, from Georgia to New Hampshire, understood that this wasn't governance, this was abuse.
So what Paine did so brilliantly was take these big philosophical ideas about rights and liberty and anchor them to these 3 very concrete categories of injustice that everyone could understand: financial, physical, and economic.
Yes, he didn't just give them a reason to be angry. He gave them a detailed, evidence-based case for political separation.
That's the real turning point in the colonial mindset. Paine gives them permission to stop seeing Britain as a mother country that needed to be obeyed and start seeing it as a hostile foreign power. He just erases all the moral ambiguity.
He does.
And if you think about a modern U.S. equivalent of that port closure, imagine if a powerful entity, say the federal government, decided to shut down the port of Long Beach or severely restrict air traffic into Chicago O'Hare, not for safety, but to force a city or state to comply with a specific policy.
It would be seen as an act of war, a weaponization of public infrastructure against citizens. That's exactly how the colonists saw the Port Act. Paine just gave voice to that feeling.
And by laying out these grievances so clearly, so powerfully, he essentially wrote the first draft of the Declaration of Independence.
He really did. Jefferson's job was, in many ways, easier because of Paine. Paine had already made the emotional and logical case to the people. Jefferson just had to formalize it.
Common sense was the legal brief that was handed out to the jury, the American people. The Declaration was just the reading of the verdict.
A verdict that Paine had made inevitable. He made sure the colonists were not just ready to be the jury, but ready to be the executioners of that old political bond.
So after he lays all that out, the financial oppression, the physical occupation, the economic warfare, he leaves you with this implicit question: are you ready to sign on the dotted line?
And the answer across the colonies was a resounding yes.
The pen really did clear the path for the sword. This is such a critical moment in the story.
It is. And it brings us to the next phase, where all this revolutionary idealism has to face the brutal reality of war.
Before we get to that, to the darkest hour of the revolution and how Paine's words literally became a part of military strategy, we need to take a quick pause. If you are as captivated as we are by how one pamphlet could move millions, please remember to support our work so we can keep bringing you these kinds of analyses.
Your support truly keeps this conversation going.
Like, subscribe, and share for more update, and continue to next. Welcome back to BookPodCastZone. We have traced the explosion of common sense in early 1776, the signing of the Declaration in July. But the war. The war was a different story. It was far from a guaranteed win. The real test began when the soaring idealism of that summer crashed into the brutal reality of the following winter.
This is the existential moment. This is where the powerful ideas have to prove they're strong enough to stand up against things like starvation, frostbite, and despair. Our source analysis takes us right to that grim reality. Valley Forge, December of 1777.
And you have to put yourself there. Imagine it. It's a year and a half after Common Sense first came out. All that initial excitement is gone. It's been replaced by hunger and cold. Washington's army is freezing. Their supplies are gone. Men are deserting every day. Morale is at an absolute rock bottom. The whole revolution is hanging by a thread.
And the enemy at that point wasn't just the British army, which was comfortably quartered in Philadelphia. The enemy was the Pennsylvania winter. The enemy was hopelessness.
This is the moment when a philosophical text should, by all rights, become irrelevant. When your soldiers are starving, what good are words?
But Paine had anticipated this moment of psychological collapse. And our analysis focuses on his next series of writings, the American Crisis Papers. The first one is often seen as a kind of appendix or sequel to Common Sense. It's described as a love letter to the freezing army, and it arrived at the absolute lowest point of the war.
And this, you could argue, is maybe Paine's most important contribution to the actual physical survival of the revolution. He took his political argument and turned it into a weapon, a motivational necessity.
He did. He published those iconic words. These are the times that try men's souls.
It's one of the most famous lines in American history, but it's more than just great rhetoric. It became a kind of mantra for enduring hardship, for a cause that was bigger than yourself. It told that freezing, starving soldier, your suffering right now isn't meaningless. It's the price of freedom. Your pain is actually proof of your commitment.
It completely reframed their misery. It shifted their focus from the physical suffering of the moment to the moral clarity of their cause. And this is the emotional peak. Paine turns hope from a luxury, a feeling you have when things are good, into a piece of strategic ammunition. When the army ran out of food and blankets, the ideas in that pamphlet became the fuel that kept them going.
He also uses this incredibly clever rhetorical trick to fight desertion. He invents the idea of the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot, the person who, in his words, will shrink from the service of their country when things get tough. So by choosing to stay, by enduring the cold and the hunger, you weren't just surviving. You were actively proving that you were not a coward. You were one of the true patriots.
It was psychological warfare against despair. It gave the common soldier a simple, powerful narrative. They weren't just fighting the British. They were fighting for their own souls, proving they were worthy of the freedom they sought.
And this isn't just a theory. We have concrete, measurable evidence that this worked, not just as philosophy, but as military strategy. The context bite from our source is crystal clear. General George Washington himself orders that this new pamphlet be read aloud to every single brigade at Valley Forge.
And you have to think about Washington. He was a pragmatist, a military man through and through. He understood the logistics of morale. He knew that tactics and discipline could only get you so far when your men are literally dying from exposure. They needed a reason why. They needed a story to make the sacrifice make sense.
And what happens when he orders it read?
Morale spikes. It's an immediate, quantifiable effect. The pen was literally being used to outlast the sword. The soldiers were reminded that they weren't just fighting for land, they were fighting for the principles in that little pamphlet.
Let's use that U.S. Live example synthesis to really capture the moment. Picture a soldier, huddled by a dying fire at Valley Forge. He pulls out a ragged, dog-eared copy of the paper. The cover's torn, the pages are probably stained and frozen together.
He doesn't have a new pair of boots. He doesn't have a hot meal. But he has these words that remind him why he's there. That the king is a fraud, the cause is just, and that he is one of the tested souls who did not shrink.
That ragged piece of paper is the moment when an abstract idea like liberty becomes something you were willing to freeze to death for. It's the ultimate example of words as fuel.
It was the belief system that held the army together when everything else, food, supply, shelter, hope, was collapsing around them.
It provided the moral justification to keep fighting an impossible war. Paine essentially wrote the founding narrative of American exceptionalism, the idea that this cause was blessed, that it was greater than any individual.
He kept that revolutionary flame alive when the physical fires were all burning out.
And it leaves us with that final cliffhanger for the section. Will the pen outlast the sword? And in that terrible winter, against all odds, the answer was yes. Paine's words became a shield. They became the backbone of the entire cause.
A revolution that, in all likelihood, would have failed without those pages of inflammatory and, more importantly, incredibly motivating truth.
What an incredible journey from a philosophical idea to a literal tool of survival. And it sets us up perfectly for our final section. How do these 18th century ideas hold up in the wild complexity of the year 2025?
This is the essential question for us today. Can the principles of common sense even survive the information age?
Like, subscribe, and share for more update, and continue to next.
Welcome back to BookPodCastZone for our final segment. We have followed common sense from a Philadelphia print shop all the way to the frozen trenches of Valley Forge. Now, we're going to make the big jump. Forward 249 years, it is time for the ultimate stress test. Bridging the centuries. And the hook our analysis uses is so powerful. Fast forward 249 years. A push notification pings on your phone. New law passed without your vote. Sound familiar?
It sounds incredibly familiar. The pamphlet that brought down a king now fits in your pocket. Not the physical pamphlet, of course, but its central idea, the demand for accountability, for self-governance. That idea is more accessible than ever and maybe, frighteningly, just as relevant.
We aren't fighting a literal king across an ocean, but that feeling of being voiceless, of being disconnected from the centers of power, that feeling is very much alive today, just in new and more complex forms.
The big challenge today isn't literacy like it was for some back then. It's the sheer speed and complexity of everything.
Exactly. Paine's main goal in 1776 was to make complicated things seem obvious. So our analysis applies his big ideas, the intellectual blueprint he left us, to our modern world.
So let's start with the first one, the absolute cornerstone, question authority. For Paine, that meant attacking the divine right of kings. For us today, it means applying that same deep, relentless skepticism to our 21st century power structures.
Things like rapid last-minute legislation, the immense influence of corporations and lobbyists, and maybe most critically, the sheer volume of information that is presented to us as fact, whether it's from traditional media or social media.
Paine's lesson was that authority has to constantly justify itself with reason. It can't just rely on tradition or force.
And if we apply that to 2025, it means we have to start asking hard questions about the modern black boxes of power. How are secret algorithms making decisions that affect our civic lives? Who is really funding this incredibly complex legislation? Why is a massive 1,000-page bill that affects the entire economy being rushed through Congress in the middle of the night?
That last one, the rush, is a perfect modern echo of the kind of tyranny Paine was fighting. These omnibus bills that bundle dozens of totally unrelated policies together. When a bill is thousands of pages long and it's being voted on in a few hours to avert a government shutdown, even the politicians voting on it admit they haven't read it.
And that procedural complexity creates a system where the people being governed cannot possibly understand the laws that govern them. If it takes a team of corporate lawyers weeks to figure out what a new law actually does, then by Paine's standard of clarity and common sense, that law is fundamentally anti-democratic. It creates that exact same feeling of powerlessness.
Okay, second big idea, demand representation. Paine showed the absurdity of being ruled without giving consent. Today, that idea is challenged not by a king, but by these deep structural issues that dilute the power of an individual's vote.
The modern feeling of betrayal isn't a tax on tea. It's seeing a policy that you and your entire community oppose get passed anyway because of a massive lobbying effort from a special interest group. Or, even more directly, it's gerrymandering.
Right.
Gerrymandering is the ultimate modern insult to common sense. It's a system that allows politicians to choose their voters instead of the other way around.
It completely undermines the idea of geographic representation that was so important to the founders. When you draw a legislative district to look like a crazy ink blot just to guarantee a certain political outcome, the election is basically decided before a single vote is cast.
It becomes another form of that accident of birth. Not the birth of a king, but the birth of a map drawn in a back room to lock in power for a decade, regardless of what the public actually wants.
So Paine's core demand that the government must clearly and fairly reflect the will of the governed is being stress-tested by these modern tools of political manipulation.
And that leads right into his third and final lesson for us. Choose courage. In 1776, courage meant facing down a line of British muskets.
A very physical, very immediate kind of courage.
Yes. Today, the courage we need is often more intellectual and moral. It's the courage to reject groupthink. The courage to speak out against powerful institutions, even when it's unpopular. And maybe the hardest one of all. The courage to simply stay engaged and not give in to the overwhelming fatigue and anger of the modern political cycle.
The modern revolutionary act might just be the courage to log off, to disengage from the toxic speed of online discourse, and instead engage deeply with an issue in your local community. Or the courage to demand that a legislative process slow down so that people can actually understand what's happening.
Paine's courage was physical. Ours is often the courage to demand clarity in the face of intentional complexity.
He didn't write for academics, he wrote for the farmer and the dock worker. His genius was taking the core of the argument and making it accessible to everyone quickly to make the complicated obvious.
And that is probably the single most necessary skill for a citizen in 2025. Finding the clarity to see what is truly unjust when you're caught in a blizzard of conflicting information and deliberate confusion.
It seems like we've traded the tyranny of a distant king for the tyranny of complexity.
I think that's right. And Paine's legacy, his pamphlet, is essentially an instruction manual for how to fight that new tyranny. Simplify the argument, expose the lie at the heart of the system, and give people the intellectual tools they need to claim their own power.
So let's wrap this up. Let's synthesize this incredible journey of common sense. It starts as this tiny, controversial spark in a Philadelphia print shop. It becomes a powerful philosophical weapon that exposes the very idea of monarchy as absurd.
From there, it becomes America's first real, popular list of grievances, detailing exactly why a separation wasn't just a good idea but a moral necessity. And finally, it becomes a tool of war, a morale booster that keeps the Continental Army from collapsing during the darkest winter of the Revolution.
Paine gave the colonists the why monarchy is illogical and the how, here is the list of betrayals. It was an enduring instruction manual for freedom, reminding us that we always have to be vigilant, always be willing to challenge the structures of authority, whether they wear a crown or hide behind a 1,000-page legal document.
His final gift was showing us that independence isn't a destination we reached in 1776. It's an ongoing act. An act of choice, of courage, and a clear thinking that every generation has to renew for itself.
And with that, we want to leave you with our final provocative thought, something taken directly from the spirit of common sense. We want you to think about Paine's powerful critique of absurdity.
What is your 2025 common sense rule that needs to be broken? What piece of accepted wisdom in politics or corporate life? What law that exists only because of its complexity is, when you really look at it, an insult to common sense today?
What is the modern lie that Thomas Paine would just laugh at if he were here? We want you to drop your biggest structural absurdity in the comments.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into one of the most powerful political texts ever written.
We hope these words entered your mind and that now, as promised, there's no going back.
Farewell for now.